Well, a warm welcome to this slightly different talk today. Now, I want to talk about therapeutics and drugs. This is partly to do with COVID, but it's partly general as well. Now, part of the problem with the way that pharmaceuticals are arranged, especially in Western countries, is that pharmaceuticals are mostly researched and manufactured by commercial companies. And of course, commercial companies need to make a profit, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, if you give someone a drug for a day or 2 days or 3 days or for a week, and then you then cure them, then they go off and live the rest of their lives being happy and healthy, then that's not good for repeat business for pharmaceutical companies. Whereas if you can sell someone a drug like a statin for cholesterol that you take every day for the rest of your life, that's good for repeat business. Or if you can give someone a hypotensive medication for treating their high blood pressure, and you have to take one every day for the rest of your life, that's good for repeat business, because the blood pressure medicines control blood pressure. They don't treat whatever the fundamental cause. So we spend a lot of time treating symptoms and manifestations of disease rather than the disease itself. And that's got a lot of interesting implications. And this is why for a long time I've advocated that governments actually take over a lot of the research and development and potentially manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. I mean, this can be done in cooperation with private sector companies, but we have to have pharmaceuticals that are aimed at treating acute illness quickly. And the other problem that kind of goes with that is there's not too much incentive to treat illnesses that affect poorer people. So malaria, for example, the treatment still isn't really that satisfactory. Dengue fever, the treatment is not that satisfactory. But that affects people in poorer areas primarily. And these things have a huge burden of morbidity and mortality. So let's look at this in the current context. It's quite interesting. Now, last week, President Biden's administration authorized $3.2 billion. A huge amount of money to developing antiviral medication. Now, Anthony Fauci seems to be the chief medical advisor for the Biden administration, and David Kessler, chief science officer for the COVID-19 response. And these two seem to have developed this largely between them, or their departments have. And the aim is to reinvigorate the nation's antiviral program. Now, basically, we don't have too much in the way of antivirals. We have antiretroviral drugs for HIV. Again, they don't cure the HIV. You've got to keep taking them. So that's kind of good for pharmaceutical companies, because people need to keep taking the medications for the rest of their life, because they suppress viral load. They don't actually get rid of the fundamental virus itself, because it's a retrovirus that has actually gone into the DNA of the host cells. Whereas what we need is something that treats acute viruses. Now, if we had something that treated acute viruses, then you wouldn't need to vaccinate against influenza, because as soon as you got influenza, you take the antiviral and it will go away. I mean, that's potentially what we're talking about here. It's got huge implications. Of course, if we had a drug that treated COVID-19, then we probably wouldn't need the vaccines either. More on that in a minute. So this is good. We need to reinvigorate the nation's antiviral program. They're talking about the states there. Of course, I will go further and say the world. And to test whether existing drugs show promise. Now, little detail on this. Are they really going to test thoroughly existing drugs to show if they show promise? Now, this is really quite an interesting area in healthcare. Now, I've got a few examples here of where we use one drug to treat different things. So, for example, coamoxiclav is a common antibiotic, and we use that for treating urinary tract infections and respiratory infections. So 2 different diseases, both caused by infection. But here we're using the same drug. Or aspirin, of course, originally made from willow bark for treating fevers. And it will treat fevers, but it's also a good analgesic because it's anti-inflammatory, so it's good for pain. But then people discovered it was good for blood thinners as well, because it reduces platelet viscosity. So the fact that it was discovered for fevers, then they discovered it treated pain, and then they discovered it was good for blood thinning as well. You know, this is good. This is common. Amitriptyline is a common, or used to be a common antidepressant, a tricyclic antidepressant. And that's also very good for treating neuropathic pain that has its origin in the nerves. Antihistamines can treat allergies or sleep. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the common Prozac type antidepressants, can treat anxiety or depression. Steroids can help to treat the inflammatory reaction of COVID in the lungs. They can help with swollen airways from burns. They can help treat autoimmune disease. So there's a whole range of things where drugs have been repurposed. And that, of course, is good because typically patents, I understand, in the pharmaceutical industry last for about 15 years. And, of course, aspirin was discovered in about 1790 by the Reverend Thomas Stone, I think, discovered it in Chipping Norton. And it's out of copyright. It's out of patent, so anyone can make it. And Indian manufacturers particularly are very good at mass producing these generic molecules. I bought a lot of drugs from India that I've exported to actually Eastern Europe, a bit before Romania, for example, before it joined the European Union. And they produce large amounts of these generic pharmaceuticals remarkably cheaply and to perfectly good pharmaceutical, very high standards. So that can all be done. Now, David Kessler has said here, we need this set of tools to close out this pandemic. So he's actually saying we need therapeutics as well as vaccines to close out the pandemic. Now, that is a pretty interesting statement, actually. And this guy is Chief Science Officer for the COVID-19 response. So he's looking for therapeutics as well as vaccines by the looks of it. The hard thing is to recognise that all the success, there's still several hundred deaths a day. Now, thankfully, they're going down. We are worried about the Delta variant in the States, as we are suffering from it in the UK at the moment. But people are still dying. And if we could treat them effectively with antiviral in the first week of the illness, after symptoms, when people are in the viral stage of COVID-19, that would just be brilliant. Coronavirus first, and other potential pandemic viruses are being looked at. So in other words, they want to close out this pandemic first. But of course, there's going to be other viral pandemics. That's inevitable. There are going to be other viral pandemics unless we work out a really good way of preventing them. And we are working, the G7 agreed to work on a 100-day programme for vaccines, to get vaccines up and running within 100 days of identifying a new virus. That would be incredible. But of course, generic antiviral therapeutics would be potentially even better. That would be kind of ideal. Pre-orders for this pandemic before they've been shown to work. So the model here is that the US government are pre-ordering pharmaceuticals, antiviral pharmaceuticals from pharmaceutical companies. But of course, the issue there is if they are pre-ordering them, that means they're going to be new ones, because there's no need to pre-order generics because you can buy those from any manufacturer anywhere. And as we've said, the Indian manufacturers will make huge amounts of them. So not quite consistent there. They're putting in huge pre-orders, and yet they're saying they're going to check up on existing drugs that show promise. Well, not entirely sure how those two things go together, but I'm reporting what they're saying. Anne Kwong, virologist. Now, she's quite actually famous. She developed the antiviral for hepatitis C, which I've never actually used personally, but I believe is quite effective. Now, she says this: investors are totally uninterested in antivirals. Well, that does make sense, because antivirals are probably only, unless they're like HIV type antivirals, the acute antivirals are only going to be given for a few days, and then the person's going to be cured. So you can see why the pharmaceutical industry would be less interested in doing that, because it's not a long-term sale. There's little repeat business. What they really want is chronic treatments. Take one a day for the rest of your life. There's precedent for this. I mean, Barry Marshall, the Australian gastroenterologist, he worked out that peptic ulcers were mostly caused by Helicobacter pylori bacterial infection, and he worked out a way to eradicate that using proton pump inhibitors and antibiotics. But at the time, pharmaceutical industries were selling huge amounts of H2 blockers to reduce stomach acid, but you've got to take those for the rest of your life. So again, that tension was kind of there. This is nothing new. Nobody ever gets cured of high cholesterol. Well, that's true, so you've got to take your statin every day for the rest of your life. Good for repeat business. Antivirals. Now, for acute antivirals, and she's a virologist, so she's expecting antivirals to be given for 5 to 10 days, which would be great. Then the person's cured. So last week the administration committed 1.2 billion in it, so that's what they paid in advance for 1.7 million doses of this new drug here, being developed by mostly by Merck and Ridgeback. I don't know that company. Molnupiravir. So the ones that end in vir tend to be antiviral. So they're developing this new one. So Merck are developing a new antiviral. And the government have already coughed up 1.2 billion to buy it. If it turns out it doesn't work, the government will lose its money. If it turns out it works, they've got 1.7 million doses for $1.2 billion. Quite expensive. Do the sums in your head. Quite expensive. So that will be if the new antiviral passes trials. Now, I thought that was interesting. Now, on a different topic, or is it a different topic? Anyway, we're moving on. This paper here, effects of ivermectin. This paper here, I was going to put it on the link, but I forgot. But anyway, one of the authors on this was Chris Whitty, who, of course, is our chief medical officer. So Chris Whitty was one of the co-authors of this paper. Effects of ivermectin on this mosquito fed on humans, the potential for oral insecticides in malaria control. Now, what they did was they gave the humans ivermectin. The mosquitoes then drank the blood of the humans, and the ivermectin in the human blood killed the mosquitoes. So, although the ivermectin was not toxic to the humans, it was to the mosquitoes. So that sounds like a pretty good idea. And of course, they were researching this. And talking about ivermectin, now these are direct quotes from Chris Whitty's co-authored paper, our chief medical officer. It was licensed for human use and was used in mass drug administration programs. Direct quote. To control river blindness, it was administered to more than 80 million adults and children. The drug has proved to be safe. Now, let me just read out what Chris Whitty and his co-authors have written there. The drug has proved to be safe. Direct quote, talking about ivermectin, the drug has proved to be safe. If you don't agree with that statement, go to Chris Whitty and his co-authors and say, oi, you said ivermectin was safe. If you don't agree with that statement. Alternatively, you might want to accept this from the peer-reviewed literature, that Chris Whitty and his co-authors have said ivermectin has proved to be safe. Now, safe's not a term I particularly like. I mean, the safe and the safe. You can never guarantee things are safe, of course, but this is a direct quote from this paper. I'm not prescribing, of course. It's a direct quote from the paper for academic purposes. Doses up to 10 times the approved limit are well tolerated by healthy volunteers, they say in the paper. Direct quote from the paper. Adverse reactions are few and usually mild. Few and usually mild. Sounds like this is quite a safe drug, really, doesn't it? From what Chris Whitty and his co-authors say here. Barcelona Institute of Global Health. More than 3 billion treatments have been distributed in the context of this. Now this is actually ivermectin, as given by Merck, the Merck donation program alone. So Merck have been remarkably generous, donated huge amounts of ivermectin, eradicated huge swathes of parasitic disease, and it's just been brilliant. Onchocerciasis, the river blindness, used to be really common, virtually gone. Other parasitic disease that Merck has donated this ivermectin, and it's been remarkably effective. Of course, it's out of patent now. This is a quote from the Barcelona Institute for Global Health. It's got an excellent safety profile, apparently. Excellent safety profile. Most adverse reactions are mild and transitory, apparently, and associated with parasite death rather than the drug itself. So what happens is, if you can get this with antibiotics as well. If you give an antibiotic or an antiparasitic drug, it kills the bacteria or the parasites, and they kind of break up, and it releases toxins from the parasites or the bacteria into the blood, so the person can feel worse for a period of time. So these side effects indicate that the drug is having an antiparasitic effect rather than an adverse effect of the drug itself. Now, call me cynical if you like, but I get the impression that some people are almost, it would appear, almost trying to give the impression that ivermectin's not safe, having looked at that evidence. So this doctor, Dr. Swaminathan, she's one of the advisors, I think, to the W.H.O. Safety and efficacy are important when using any drug for a new indication. Well, of course they are. Of course they're important. WHO recommends against the use of ivermectin for COVID-19, except with clinical trials. Now, I think we've seen that ivermectin's safe from this data here. And we have given a lot of evidence on this channel for the potential efficacy of ivermectin. And we have demanded answers from Dr. Fauci, Dr. Whitty and Sir Patrick Vallance and all the other leaders of the healthcare administrations to comment on the validity of this drug. If it's rubbish, tell us. But there's enough evidence to demand an opinion. Of course, we haven't got one. We demanded this, well, we've demanded this for some time, but of course no one listens. WHO recommends against, so safety and efficacy are important when using it for new indication. Now, this is almost, a cynic might think this is intimating that a drug is going to be safe for one disease, but somehow dangerous for another. Well, all these examples I've given here, the coamoxiclav, the aspirin, the amitriptyline, the antihistamines, the SSRIs, the steroids, as far as I understand it, the doses are the same and the toxicity is the same. In pharmacology, we have something called pharmacokinetics, and that is the way that the body works on a drug and eliminates the drug, and that's going to be the same, almost regardless of the condition the patient has. Okay, if they've got renal failure or liver failure, there might be a problem. But for most people, it's going to be consistent. And then there's the other part of pharmacology is called pharmacodynamics, and that's the effect the drug has on the body. And again, this is going to be the same for different conditions. The drug is the same molecule. Now, there are exceptions. So, for example, if someone has meningitis, the tight cells that normally separate the blood and the brain, they can be inflamed and damaged. And drugs which normally go into the blood can get into the brain. So there are exceptions like meningitis, but I can't think of another one offhand. But of course, doctors know about these things. If doctors are prescribing drugs, this is why you have doctors prescribing drugs, because they know these things. So I'm not sure I agree with Dr. Swaminathan that it's going to be radically different because it's a new indication if we were giving ivermectin for COVID-19. I'm not sure I agree with her. I don't really see why the pharmacokinetics and the pharmacodynamics of the drug should change. But that's only me. She works for the World Health Organization. Now, Bram Rockweg, this was in this is Reuters report, I think. Now, he's the co-chair of the panel that reviewed ivermectin. I think he works at McMaster's, which I believe is in Canada. Direct quotes again from the Reuters article that Reuters claim he said, "We certainly need more data in order to make informed decisions." Well, this is axiomatic, isn't it? You know, we always need more data. We always need more data. But sometimes we've just got to go with what we've got. We did see an increase in adverse effects in patients that were randomised to ivermectin. Oh dear. I wonder if Chris Ritchie and his colleagues were wrong. So this is almost an intimation that it's a bit dangerous. What was it Chris Ritchie's paper said again? Yes, I've got it here somewhere. Oh yeah, that was it. Chris Whitty and his team said the drug has proven to be safe. Oh, but they saw an increase in adverse effects in patients that were randomised to ivermectin. Okay. With repurposed drugs, he's talking about there can be more harm than any good. Oh dear. Okay, so it looks like there's risk of harm here, according to these quotes. Merck's statement on ivermectin for COVID-19. Merck having been so generous in the past to treat parasitic disease. A concerning lack of safety data in the majority of studies. So they're worried about the lack of safety data as well. So it looks like Merck and a couple of people that represent the World Health Organization are worried about safety data. But it looks like we have that paper from Chris Whitty that says the drug ivermectin is known to be safe. Proven to be safe. The drug was proven to be safe, was the direct quote from that paper. So there you go. So again, because of the safety of ivermectin, apparently, and yet people intimating that it's not safe, we need definitive statements on this. So we need these leaders to say, is ivermectin safe or not? Who was right? Chris Whitty and his co-authors, or these other guys, who was right? And is ivermectin efficacious in COVID-19 and for other viruses? Stand up. If it's not efficacious, say so. You're the bosses. Anthony Fauci can stand up and say ivermectin is completely useless for COVID-19. Fine. Stand up and say that. Or if it is efficacious, then perhaps we could use it under appropriate medical supervision. Okay, so there we go. I've shown, shall we say, the tension between different views. Okay, thank you for watching.